According to reports, Kenya and Namibia have been added to the grey list by the Financial Action Task Force, a global anti-money laundering watchdog, due to deficiencies in dealing with money laundering and terrorist financing. This move puts Kenya under increased scrutiny, requiring critical changes to its financial infrastructure to mitigate the risk of being a haven for illicit funds. Now, Kenya, previously considered a financial hub in the region, is now among 27 countries on the grey list, which includes Nigeria, South Africa, Mali, Mozambique, Burkina Faso, Senegal, and Cameroon. The downgrade may result in stricter due diligence, posing challenges in securing funding and causing reputational damage. The government, which had made amendments to anti-money laundering laws, expresses commitments to addressing deficiencies and expects a minimal impact on the economy. And at this point, joining me from Paris in France is Esteban Gudici, Senior Policy Advisor, Transnational Alliance to Combat Illicit Trade. That's TRACIT. Thank you so much, Esteban, for joining us.
No, thank you, Lekan. It's a pleasure for us to be here this morning with you.
Now, did you see this grey listing of Kenya and Namibia as a surprise to you?
Well, it was not necessarily a surprise, but one thing that you mentioned correctly in your introduction is that it has been placed in the grey list, both Kenya and Namibia. This is the common jargon, but normally it's called jurisdictions under increased monitoring. This means that the countries pledge to continue working with the Financial Action Task Force, which is different from the blacklist, which is non-cooperative jurisdictions, which is not the case here. But well, you asked me if this came as a surprise. In relation to Kenya, I must say that this was not a surprise. There were rumors already. Last week we discussed specifically how Kenya would work to improve its regulations in relation to cryptocurrencies. And this was one of the recommendations issued by the Financial Action Task Force, meaning that Kenya needs to work on this. But it was not a surprise because during the year 2021, culminating in year 2022, there was a mutual evaluation report which was conducted by the East and Southern Africa Anti-Money Laundering Group. This is a FATF, a Financial Action Task Force regional group, which is devoted to make these kind of assessments. When this assessment was done, it could be evidence that there were some shortcomings in what has to do with the strategic to fight money laundering and financing of terrorism in Kenya, including what I mentioned about virtual assets. Probably I'm going to elaborate more on that later. And in relation to Namibia, this is a little bit the same in the sense that the last mutual evaluation that was done in Namibia demonstrated that there were many recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force that were adequately implemented in the country, but there were some problems with at least 6 or 7 issues that, measurements that need to be taken, that it's a problem mostly related to effectiveness of how things are effectively implemented in the country. And this is why it has also been placed in the grey list. But I believe that for both countries, this is not that dramatic. And well, I guess that we will discuss this in your questions that are coming.
Yeah, hopefully if you have enough time. Well, we know that whether being on a grey list or a black list, they actually attract serious economic implications for these countries. So then let's look at how these designation influence both nations, that is Kenya and Namibia, in terms of their strategy for expansion into investment sources and, of course, to build international business operations, because I know that Kenya particularly is actually critical about this.
Yes, well, as a general remark, we can say that when a country is placed in the grey list, there are implications that have to do with reputation. Normally, there is less investment in the country. And one of the most, let's say, tangible manifestations is that there is always problems with the cross-border transactions because the different countries that need to work with the concerned country, the financial entities, will have more due diligence and more checks and balances before receiving inflows or outflows. So this is something that impacts the economy of all countries. I can tell you that, for instance, the International Monetary Fund has found that countries who are subject to the Financial Action Task Force grey list suffer an average net loss of 7.6% of capital inflow across their borders when this happens. Now, if we go specifically into detailing what has to do with Kenya and with Namibia, I think, well, they are two very different countries in the sense of their economy. Last week we were discussing Kenya. It's a market that it's growing a lot in terms also in fintech. And I think that this is going to undermine a little bit the prospects of the country. And it's a shame because the projected growth for 2023 was 5.6% of the GDP, which is, for me, I mean, it's very good. So the prospects were good. The imports and exports that the country had, I mean, the exports were worth 7 billion in 2022. And the expectation is that this was going to keep on growing, also in relation to fintech. The fact that it has been subject to the grey list of the Financial Action Task Force undermines these good economic prospects. Likewise with Namibia.
Okay, so basically the underlying aim is to ensure that these countries deal decisively with issues around terrorism financing and and money laundering cases. Those are the allegations leveled against this country. So what are the specific areas you believe Kenya and Namibia should work upon in dealing with these issues?
Well, Kenya has committed, and I think that what needs to be tackled by the country specifically is to improve the strategy. It needs to be streamlined. There is also something that we discussed last week that it has to do with the licensing and supervision of virtual asset service providers. This is all related to cryptocurrency because the country uses a lot of cryptocurrency, and the FATF discussed this last week. And this is something that needs to be looked at. So these are the two basic ones from Kenya. In relation to Namibia, I think that it has a lot to do with the improvement of the effectiveness of the investigations. They need to have more numbers on investigations related to money laundering, and also they need to tackle everything that has to do with non-profit operators. These are the two main takeaways for each of these countries.
Okay, Mr. Ben Gudici, Senior Policy Advisor, Trusted, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
My great pleasure. Have a nice day.
And you too. And that's it on today's edition of Business Edge. Do not forget that you can visit our social media handles at News Central TV, and also head on to our website www.newscentral.africa, and don't forget to download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store. We'll be back tomorrow 11 a.m. West African time, even as we look at other African angled business issues right here on News Central Television. I am Lekon Obanjo. Enjoy the rest of your day.